The worst part about family dinners wasn't the food. My mother actually cooked well when she bothered to cook at all rather than ordering takeout from expensive restaurants and transferring it to her own serving dishes so she could pretend she'd made it herself, which fooled no one but which we all pretended to believe because that was easier than dealing with her defensiveness. It wasn't even the forced small talk or the tension that seemed to hang in the air of my parents' cramped dining room like smoke that never cleared, thick and choking and making everything feel harder than it needed to be. The worst part was the inevitable moment when the conversation would turn to me, and I'd have to sit there while my family systematically dismantled any remaining shred of my self-worth, all while pretending it was concern or tough love or just harmless family teasing. The kind of teasing that came with sharp edges and left marks you couldn't see but could definitely feel. This particular Sunday dinner in March, 3 years before everything changed, 3 years before I'd proved them all catastrophically wrong, was following the usual script with depressing predictability. We were seated around my parents' dining room table, which was too large for the room it occupied and required everyone to squeeze past each other to get to their seats. My mother had made chicken, which she'd somehow managed to both undercook and overcook simultaneously, leaving it rubbery in some places and dried out in others. My father had opened an expensive bottle of wine that he'd explained the provenance of for a full 5 minutes before pouring, as if any of us cared about the vineyard's history or the ideal serving temperature. "So, Alex," my older brother Derek said, leaning back in his chair with that smug expression he'd perfected over 32 years of being the golden child, the one who'd done everything right, who'd followed my father's footsteps into law and never once deviated from the approved path. "Still working at that coffee shop? What's it been now? 4 years. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country." I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. He knew exactly how long it had been. Derek had the kind of memory that retained details specifically so he could weaponize them later. He probably had a spreadsheet somewhere tracking my employment history, my failures, all the ways I disappointed our parents. 3.5, I corrected quietly, cutting my overcooked chicken into smaller and smaller pieces that I had no intention of eating. My appetite had died somewhere around the time Derek had walked in, wearing his $3,000 suit and made a point of commenting on my $20 shirt from Target. 3.5 years at minimum wage. Derek shook his head like this was the saddest thing he'd ever heard, like I was a tragedy in human form, though his tone suggested he found it more amusing than tragic, more proof of his superiority than cause for genuine sympathy. "Jesus, Alex, most people work those jobs for a few months while they figure out their real career. You've made it your life's work. That's almost impressive in its own way, like the commitment to mediocrity is actually kind of remarkable." "I'm also taking online classes," I said, knowing even as the words left my mouth that it wouldn't matter, that nothing I said would change how they saw me, how they decided I was the failure, and nothing would shake them from that conclusion. "Online classes," my younger sister Melissa repeated, and the way she said it made it sound like I'd admitted to believing in flat earth theory or crystal healing or some other obviously ridiculous thing that only idiots would take seriously. "In what? Basket weaving? Advanced coffee making techniques? How to maximize your minimum wage potential?" Her boyfriend, Brad, Chad, something equally forgettable, laughed too loudly at her joke, clearly trying to impress her by joining in on the mockery. He was new to these family dinners, hadn't quite figured out yet that being mean to me was the price of admission to the Whitmore family social circle. Computer science, programming. I kept my voice level, kept my eyes on my plate, refused to let them see how much this hurt. "Oh, honey," my mother interjected, and somehow her pity was worse than Derek's mockery or Melissa's disdain. There was something about the way she looked at me, like I was a wounded animal that needed to be put down, but she didn't have the heart to do it. "Those online classes aren't real degrees. Employers can tell the difference. You need to go to an actual university if you want a real education. Online programs are they're scams, really. Taking money from people who don't know any better. I can't afford an actual university, Mom. That's why I'm taking online classes I can pay for as I go. Classes that teach actual skills I can use to build a career." "You could have taken out loans like the rest of us," Derek said, gesturing at himself and Melissa with his wine glass. Expensive wine that my father had pulled from his collection specifically for tonight, the good stuff they never offered to me because what would be the point of wasting it on someone with an unsophisticated palate, someone who probably couldn't even taste the difference between this and the $10 bottles from the grocery store. That's what normal people do. They invest in their future, they understand that sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And then spend the next 20 years paying them off with interest, Graduating with 6 figures of debt before you even start your career? No thanks. I've seen how that works out. I looked pointedly at Derek, who I happened to know was still paying off his law school loans 8 years after graduation and would be for at least another decade. At least they'd have degrees, real jobs, not serving lattes to people who actually made something of themselves. Melissa took a sip of her wine, her pinky extended in what I was sure she thought was an elegant gesture but just made her look pretentious. Do you know how embarrassing it is when my friends ask what my brother does, and I have to tell them you're a barista? At 28, I usually just tell them you're between opportunities or figuring things out because the truth is too humiliating. Melissa, my father said, but it was a half-hearted admonishment, the kind that suggested he agreed with her assessment but thought she could have phrased it more tactfully, could have delivered the knife wound with a bit more finesse and a bit less obvious malice. I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them, taking in the scene like I was watching a movie about someone else's dysfunctional family rather than living through my own. My father, a corporate attorney who'd spent my entire childhood explaining that success meant prestige and a 6-figure salary and the right address in the right neighborhood, a man who measured his own worth by his professional accomplishments and his ability to tell stories about important clients and high-stakes cases. My mother, a real estate agent who measured people's worth by their addresses and square footage and whether they could afford to buy in the good neighborhoods. A woman who'd introduced me to strangers my entire life with an apologetic tone, as if my existence required an explanation or an excuse. Derek, who'd followed my father into law and never missed an opportunity to mention his partnership track at his firm, his billable hours, his important cases, his connections with judges and senior partners. Who'd spent the past decade systematically distancing himself from anything that reminded him of being middle class, including me. Melissa, working in pharmaceutical sales, driving a leased BMW she couldn't really afford but needed to maintain her image, living in an apartment that cost more than she should be spending but was in the right zip code for networking events and impressing dates. Wearing designer clothes purchased on credit cards she was juggling, presenting an image of success that was more performance than reality. And then there was me. 28 years old, working at Grounds and Beans coffee shop for $13.50 an hour, living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood my family wouldn't visit after dark, in a building where the elevator was broken more often than it worked, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV through them, wearing clearance rack clothes from Target and Old Navy, wearing shoes until they literally fell apart, driving a 15-year-old Toyota Camry that needed a new transmission I couldn't afford, and that made a concerning grinding noise whenever I accelerated past 40 miles per hour. The disappointment, the failure, the cautionary tale they'd tell at future family gatherings about what happens when you don't apply yourself, when you don't have ambition, when you settle for less than you should, when you make bad choices and refuse to accept good advice. Except they had no idea what I was actually doing, and I'd decided months ago that I was done trying to explain it to them. You know what the really sad part is? Derek was warming to his theme now, probably a few glasses too deep in my father's wine collection. You were actually smart, Alex, remember? Straight A's in high school, National Honor Society. You could have done something with that. But you just gave up, got lazy. And now, look at you. 28 years old and you've accomplished exactly nothing. Derek, my mother said again, but this time her tone suggested she was warning him to stop talking, not because he was wrong, but because he was being too obvious about what they all thought. I'm not lazy, I said quietly. I work 50 hours a week. At a coffee shop. Melissa threw her hands up. That's not work, Alex. That's just existing. Anyone can pour coffee. You're wasting your potential, and honestly, at this point, I don't even think you have any potential left to waste. You've just accepted being mediocre. I think we should change the subject, my mother suggested, but not before adding her own little knife twist. Though I do worry about you, sweetheart. What happens when you're 40 and still doing this? Still living in that awful apartment? You need to start thinking about your future before it's too late. If it's not already too late, my father muttered into his wine. I set down my fork carefully, precisely, and stood up from the table. I need to go. Oh, don't be so sensitive, Derek said. We're just being honest. Someone needs to give you a reality check. The reality is that you know nothing about my life, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. You see me working at a coffee shop and you assume that's all I am, all I'll ever be. And you're so convinced of your own superiority that it never occurs to you that maybe there's more going on than you realize. Like what? Melissa challenged. What could possibly be going on that would excuse 3.5 years of going nowhere? I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair. Thanks for dinner, Mom. I'll see you all later. Alex, wait. my mother started, but I was already heading for the door. "Let them go," I heard my father say as I reached the hallway. Maybe some time alone to think about their choices would be good for them. I drove back to my studio apartment through the March drizzle, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. They didn't know. They had no idea. They didn't know about the 3 online certificates I'd already earned in programming and web development. They didn't know about the freelance coding work I'd been doing on the side for the past year, building websites and applications for small businesses, charging rates that started modest and had steadily increased as my skills improved and my reputation grew. They didn't know that I'd been saving every penny I didn't absolutely need to survive, eating ramen and rice, never going out, wearing the same 5 outfits on rotation, walking or biking everywhere to save on gas. They didn't know about the investment account I'd opened, the careful research I'd done, the hours spent learning about index funds and compound interest and long-term growth strategies. They didn't know that I'd been awake until 2 or 3 in the morning most nights for the past 3 years, working my coffee shop shift during the day and coding until my eyes burned at night, learning everything I could, building a portfolio, networking with other developers online, slowly and methodically creating a path forward that didn't involve student loan debt or working my way up some corporate ladder. They didn't know because I'd stopped telling them, because every time I'd tried to share what I was working on, they'd dismissed it or minimized it or explained why it wouldn't work. So I'd learned to keep my mouth shut and just focus on the work. Let them think I was lazy. Let them think I'd given up. Let them think I was the family disappointment. I knew the truth. And someday soon, if my projections were right, they'd know it too. Chapter 2. The Silent Years. The 3 years that followed that dinner were simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I kept working at Grounds and Beans, kept living in my studio apartment, kept driving my dying Toyota. To anyone looking from the outside, especially my family, nothing changed. I was still the disappointment, still stuck in the same dead-end job, still going nowhere. But everything was changing, just quietly, invisibly. My freelance coding work had grown from occasional small projects to a steady stream of clients willing to pay significant money for custom web applications and software solutions. I'd specialized in e-commerce platforms for small to medium businesses, and I'd gotten good at it. Really good. Good enough that I was charging $150 an hour and had a waiting list. I'd automated as much of my life as possible to maximize my working hours. Meal prep on Sundays, wardrobe reduced to the essentials, no social life to speak of, no dating, no entertainment budget. Every waking hour was either at the coffee shop, coding, or learning something new that would make me better at coding. My family continued their pattern of mockery at the quarterly family dinners I forced myself to attend. Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and the occasional birthday celebration. Each time, the comments got sharper, more pointed, as if they were frustrated that their criticism wasn't motivating me to change. Still pouring coffee, huh? Derek at Christmas, 2 years before everything changed. I just made partner, by the way. Youngest in the firm's history. But hey, at least your job has benefits, right? Oh wait, does it? I heard your car died, Melissa at Easter, 18 months out. Dad said you had to take the bus to work for a week. That's so sad. I'm getting a new BMW next month, fully loaded. Want to go for a ride sometime? Oh, who am I kidding? You'd probably get fingerprints on the leather. We're worried about you, my mother, every single time we talked on the phone. You're going to be 30 soon. Don't you want to do something with your life? Find a real career? Meet someone? Have a family? You can't live like this forever. I let them talk. I smiled and nodded and made non-committal sounds. And then I went home and coded for another 6 hours. My investment account grew, slowly at first, then faster as I was able to contribute more. I maxed out my Roth IRA every year. I put everything else into low-cost index funds and let compound interest do its work. I read everything I could about personal finance, real estate, early retirement strategies. I calculated and recalculated my numbers, tracked every expense, optimized every dollar, lived like I was broke even as my net worth steadily climbed. By year 2, I'd saved $85,000 and my investment accounts had grown to $112,000. I was coding full-time from home by then, having quit the coffee shop 6 months earlier when my freelance income had consistently exceeded what I'd been making at Grounds and Beans. I hadn't told my family I'd quit. When they asked, I just said, still at the coffee shop, and let them believe it. It was easier than explaining. By year 3, I had $140,000 in savings and another $180,000 in investments. I'd started taking on bigger projects, entire system migrations for growing companies, complex applications that took months to build and paid accordingly. I'd raised my rates to $200 an hour and was still turning away work. And then I found the house. It wasn't something I'd been actively looking for. I'd been browsing real estate listings as a kind of motivation, looking at what I might someday be able to afford, running the numbers on mortgages and down payments, planning for a future that still seemed distant. But then I saw it. A property that had just come on the market, listed at $980,000. A modern craftsman on 2 acres, backed up to a nature preserve, 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a home office that would be perfect for my work, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at forest and sky. A pool, a guest house, a circular driveway with a gate at the entrance. It was more house than I needed. It was more house than I'd been planning to buy, but I ran the numbers anyway, just to see. With my savings and investments, I could put down 30%, $294,000. The mortgage on the remaining $686,000 would be about $4,500 a month with taxes and insurance. I was currently making between $15,000 and $20,000 a month from my freelance work, with trajectory pointing upward. It was possible. Tight, but possible. I called the listing agent the next day and scheduled a viewing. The house was even better in person. The pictures hadn't captured the way the light came through those windows, the sense of space and peace, the view of the forest from the back deck. The home office had built-in shelving and enough room for a full server setup if I wanted. The guest house was essentially a 1-bedroom apartment, perfect for if I ever wanted to rent it out or hire a live-in assistant. "It's beautiful," I told the agent, a woman in her 50s who'd been showing me around with practiced enthusiasm. "I'd like to make an offer." She smiled, that professional realtor smile that said she'd heard this before from people who couldn't actually afford it. "Wonderful. Do you need some time to talk to your lender, get pre-approved? These properties move fast, so..." "I'm pre-approved," I said, pulling up the letter on my phone. "I can offer asking price, 30% down, conventional loan, 30-day close, no contingencies." Her smile had become more genuine. "Let me call the sellers." They accepted my offer that evening. Chapter 3. The silence before the storm. I didn't tell my family I'd bought a house. Not right away. Part of me wanted to savor the moment, to enjoy the knowledge that I'd accomplished something they'd always told me I couldn't, before they could ruin it with their commentary. Part of me was also just exhausted by the thought of explaining it to them, of fielding their questions about how I could possibly afford it, of defending myself against the inevitable accusations of irresponsibility or speculation about where the money had really come from, so I kept quiet. I went through the closing process, signed an enormous stack of papers, got the keys to my $980,000 house, and said nothing to anyone except my realtor and my lender and the movers I'd hired to transport my minimal belongings from my studio apartment to my new home. The move itself took less than 4 hours. I didn't have much: a mattress and bed frame, a desk and computer setup, a small couch, some kitchen basics, boxes of clothes and books. The house swallowed it all and still felt empty, which was fine. I'd furnish it slowly, deliberately, buying pieces that were actually nice rather than the particle board furniture I'd been making do with. I spent the first week in the house just existing in the space, working from the home office with the forest view, swimming in the pool in the evenings, walking the property line, learning the sounds the house made as it settled, the patterns of light through different windows at different times of day. It felt surreal, like I was playing house in someone else's life. Like at any moment someone would show up and explain that there had been a mistake, that someone like me wasn't supposed to have something like this, but no one came. The house was mine. The deed had my name on it. I'd earned every dollar that had gone into making this possible. On the 8th day, I finally posted a photo to social media. Nothing obvious, just a shot of the view from my back deck. Trees and sky and the edge of the infinity pool, the forest preserve stretching out beyond. The caption was simple: "New view, grateful." I posted it and then set my phone down and went back to work, not thinking much about it. By the time I checked my phone again, 3 hours later, I had 47 notifications. The family group chat, which I'd muted months ago after the 27th helpful article my mother had sent about career opportunities for people with unconventional employment histories, had exploded with messages. "Mom, Alex, is this your place? You didn't tell us you moved." Melissa, "Wait, what?" Melissa, "Is this real?" Melissa, "How many bedrooms?" Derek, "Did you rob a bank, lol?" Derek, "Seriously though, what's going on?" Mom, "Call me right now." Dad, "We need to talk about this." Melissa, "Alex, answer your phone." Melissa, "Okay, so I looked up properties with this view and there's like 3 possibilities." Melissa, "Are you renting?" Derek, "Has to be renting." Derek, "No way they bought something." Mom, "Alex, please call me. I'm very concerned." I scrolled through the messages, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. They couldn't just be happy for me, couldn't just assume I'd accomplished something positive. Their first instinct was confusion, then skepticism, then concern that I'd done something irresponsible or illegal. I typed a response. Bought it. Will invite you all over once I'm settled. The response was immediate. Melissa. Bought it? Derek. Bullshit. Mom. Alex, that's not funny. Dad. How much was this property? Melissa. Alex, seriously, what's going on? Derek. Did you win the lottery? Derek. Inheritance we don't know about? Melissa. I'm looking at listings. This has to be like minimum $800K. Mom. Alex, call me. I muted the chat again and set my phone aside. Let them speculate. Let them spin theories. I'd deal with them eventually, but not tonight. The next morning, my mother called at 7 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:15 and 7:30. At 8, my father called. At 8:30, Derek. At 9, Melissa. At 9:30, I finally answered when my mother called for the 7th time. Alex, oh thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Mom, I saw the calls. I was working. Working, right. She said it like she didn't quite believe I had real work. Alex, we need to talk about this house. Where did you get the money for a house? We're your family. We deserve to know what's going on. I bought it, with money I earned and saved. From your coffee shop job. I haven't worked at the coffee shop in over a year, Mom. Silence. Then, what? I quit Grounds and Beans 18 months ago. I've been working from home, freelance coding, and software development. I've been doing it for 3 years, building up clients, saving and investing, and now I bought a house. More silence. I could almost hear her trying to reconcile this information with the version of me she'd constructed in her head. The failure, the disappointment, the one who made bad choices and needed constant guidance. Why didn't you tell us? She finally asked, and she sounded hurt, which almost made me laugh. Because every time I tried to tell you what I was working on, you dismissed it, told me it wasn't a real job, wasn't a real degree, wasn't a real plan, so I stopped telling you and just focused on doing the work. Alex, that's not fair. We were just trying to help. By calling me lazy, by mocking me at every family dinner, by treating me like I was the family embarrassment. I kept my voice calm, but I felt 3 years of suppressed anger bubbling up. That wasn't help, Mom. That was cruelty, and I got tired of subjecting myself to it. We never meant, we were just worried. I need to go. I have a call with a client. But yes, I bought a house. It's mine. I earned it. And I'll invite you all over once I'm ready for visitors. I hung up before she could respond. The group chat remained active all day, my family apparently conferring about how to handle this unexpected development. I didn't bother reading most of it. I had work to do, but that evening I received a text from Derek. Separate from the group chat. So you actually did it. Bought a house. Color me impressed. How many bedrooms? I stared at the text for a long moment. Not quite an apology for 3 years of mockery. Not quite an acknowledgement of how he'd treated me. Just curiosity about my house. 4 bedrooms plus a guest house, I replied. Nice. Guest house like a pool house or like an actual separate building? Actual building. 1-bedroom apartment, basically. Damn. Okay, so real talk. How many guest rooms in the main house? And there it was. Not even a full day of knowing I'd accomplished something before he was already calculating how he could benefit from it. Why? I asked, though I already knew. Just curious. Seems like a lot of space for one person. Could be useful for family visits, holidays, you know. We'll see. I didn't respond to any of the other messages that night, but I could see where this was heading. I'd spent 3 years being the disappointment, the failure, the cautionary tale, and now, suddenly, I had something they wanted. The question was what they'd try to do about it. Chapter 4. The Entitlement. The answer came the following Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m., when my Ring camera alerted me to motion at the gate. I was in my home office, 3 hours deep into debugging code for a client's e-commerce platform, coffee going cold beside me. I glanced at my phone and pulled up the camera feed, expecting to see a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor out for a walk. Instead, I saw my entire family, my mother and father in their Mercedes, Derek in his Audi, Melissa in her BMW, and they weren't just stopping by to see the house. They had luggage. My mother had 2 rolling suitcases. My father was pulling boxes from the trunk. Derek had what looked like a gaming console under one arm. Melissa was directing her boyfriend. I didn't remember his name, Chad or Brad or something equally generic. as he unloaded garbage bags full of what looked like clothes from her back seat. They were moving in. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. They hadn't asked, hadn't called ahead, hadn't even confirmed that I was home. They'd just shown up with their belongings and apparently assumed they'd be welcome to stay. My father pressed the call button on the gate's intercom system. I picked up my phone and answered. "Can I help you?" "Alex. Good, you're home. Open the gate. We're loaded down here." "What are you doing?" "Moving in." My mother's voice, bright and cheerful, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "We figured you'd want family around in this big house. It's too much space for one person anyway." "I never said you could move in." "Don't be silly," my father said, and I could hear the edge of impatience in his voice. "This is a family home. You have 4 bedrooms plus a guest house. More than enough space for all of us. I live here, alone, by choice." "Alex, be reasonable." Derek's face appeared in the camera now, leaning close to the intercom. "You've got all this space. Mom and Dad are thinking about selling their place and downsizing. I'm between apartments right now. Melissa's lease is up next month. This is perfect timing. We can all be together, save money, help each other out." "Help each other out," I repeated slowly. "Like how you all helped me out for the past 3 years." "Oh, come on," Melissa said, pushing in front of Derek. "Are you seriously going to hold a grudge? We're family. Family takes care of each other. And right now, you have something we need. So open the gate." I looked at the screen, at my family crowded around the intercom, surrounded by their luggage and boxes, so confident that I would let them in, so certain that they were entitled to share what I'd worked for, what I'd earned while they'd been mocking me. I thought about all the dinners where they'd made me feel small, every dismissive comment about my job, my choices, my life, every time they'd made it clear that I was the disappointment, the failure, the one who'd never amount to anything. And then I thought about the sign I'd had installed on the gate just 3 days earlier, a large professional sign made of weathered bronze that matched the house's aesthetic. I'd ordered it on impulse, not really thinking I'd need it, just liking the statement it made about boundaries and ownership and privacy. "Did you guys see the sign on the gate?" I asked. There was a pause. I watched them on camera looking around. "What sign?" my father asked. "The one right in front of you, above the intercom, 6 inches from your face." Another pause. Then my mother's voice, uncertain now. "Private estate. Trespassers prosecuted?" "That's the one." "What does that mean?" Melissa asked, but her voice had lost its confidence. "It means this is private property, my private property, and you're not welcome to move in uninvited." "Alex, don't be dramatic." Derek again, trying to sound reasonable. "We're not trespassers. We're your family. Open the gate and let's talk about this like adults. We can talk right now, through the intercom, like we're doing." "You're really going to make us stand out here?" my mother asked, and she sounded genuinely hurt. "After we drove all this way, with all our things?" "I didn't ask you to drive here. I didn't invite you to bring your things. You just showed up and expected to be accommodated." "Because that's what family does," my father said, his patience clearly running out. "You help each other out. You share your blessings. You don't hoard everything for yourself like some kind of selfish." He stopped himself, but I'd heard enough. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice calm. "For 3 years, you all treated me like I was worthless, called me lazy, mocked my job, suggested I'd never accomplish anything, made me feel like shit at every family gathering. But now that I have something you want, suddenly I'm supposed to share? Suddenly we're family and family helps each other out?" Silence on the other end. "Here's what's actually going to happen," I continued. "You're going to get back in your cars. You're going to take your luggage and your boxes and your assumptions about being entitled to my home, and you're going to leave. Because this is my house. I bought it. I earned it. And you don't get to benefit from my success after spending years telling me I'd never have any." "Alex," my mother started, "if you don't leave in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling the police and reporting trespassers on my property." "You wouldn't dare," Derek said. "Try me." I watched the screen as they looked at each other, trying to decide if I was bluffing. My father's face was red, that particular shade of crimson that meant he was about to have an outburst, the kind where he'd yell and gesticulate and act like he was the most wronged person in the history of the world. Melissa looked like she was about to cry, her carefully applied makeup starting to run from the humidity and stress. Derek was furious, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping even through the grainy security camera feed. My mother was still trying to figure out how this had gone so wrong, how her disappointment of a child had somehow ended up with the upper hand. "This is ridiculous," my father finally said, his voice rising to that particular volume that meant he thought intimidation would work where reason hadn't. "We're your parents. We raised you. We fed you and clothed you and put a roof over your head for 18 years. We paid for your school supplies and your activities and your basic living expenses. We deserve some appreciation. We deserve to benefit from your success after everything we invested in you." "You invested in me?" I let out a laugh that didn't sound particularly amused even to my own ears. "Dad, you kicked me out the day after I graduated high school. Told me I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I've been completely financially independent for 10 years. You didn't pay for my community college classes. I worked full-time at a grocery store to cover those. You didn't help with my first apartment or my car or any of my bills. The only thing you've invested in me over the past decade is criticism and disappointment." "We gave you a place to come back to if you needed it," my mother said, her voice shaking. "We gave you family dinners and holiday celebrations and a support system. You gave me trauma and anxiety and years of feeling like I wasn't good enough." The words came out louder than I'd intended. 3 years of suppressed anger finally breaking through my carefully maintained calm. Every single family dinner was an exercise in public humiliation. Every holiday was a reminder that I was the failure, the disappointment, the one who couldn't get their life together. You made me feel worthless for years, and now you want to move into my house? Now you want to benefit from the success you spent years telling me I'd never have? "We were trying to motivate you," Derek shouted. "We were trying to push you to be better. That's what family does. They don't just accept mediocrity, they push you to improve." "No, that's what you told yourselves to justify being cruel. There's a difference between motivation and abuse. Motivation looks like encouragement and support and believing in someone even when they're struggling. What you did was just tearing me down because it made you feel superior." Melissa had started full-on crying now, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "This is so unfair. We're family. You can't just shut us out. You have 5 bedrooms and you live here alone, while we're all struggling and you won't even let us stay here? What kind of person does that? The kind of person who learned that blood relation doesn't entitle you to someone else's property or success. The kind of person who finally figured out that I don't owe you anything just because we share DNA." 30 seconds, I said, because I could see where this was going and I wanted it to be over. I wanted them gone. I wanted to go back to my quiet house and my peaceful life and pretend this hadn't happened. "You're making a huge mistake," my father said, trying to regain control of the situation, trying to find an angle that would work. "You're going to regret this. When you're sick, when you're old, when you need help, we won't be there. Don't expect us to come running when you finally realize how lonely you are." "I've been lonely my whole life," I said quietly. "Growing up in a family where I never felt good enough, never felt valued, never felt like I belonged. This house, alone, is the least lonely I've ever been. So no, I don't think I'll regret this." "But you might. You might regret spending years tearing down someone who just wanted your approval, only to discover they didn't need it after all." "Fine." Derek threw his hands up in the air, his face contorted with rage and something that looked almost like panic. "Fine, we'll leave. But don't come crying to us when you realize how lonely you are in that big empty house. Don't expect us to be there for you anymore. You're making a choice right now. You're choosing this house over your family." "No," I corrected. "I'm choosing myself over people who've treated me terribly for years. There's a difference. You all made your choices 3 years ago when you decided I was the family failure and you were going to treat me accordingly. I'm just matching your energy now." "This is insane," Melissa said, her voice high and hysterical. "You're insane. We're your family. Families help each other. They share what they have. That's how it works." "That's how it works when it's reciprocal," I said, "when everyone contributes and everyone benefits. But you all stopped treating me like family years ago. You treated me like a punchline, like an object lesson in what not to do. So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly charitable now that the tables have turned." My father had started loading boxes back into his car, his movements jerky and angry. My mother was still standing at the gate, looking up at the camera like she couldn't believe this was really happening. Derek had grabbed his gaming console and was stalking back to his Audi. Melissa's boyfriend, definitely Brad, I'd remembered, was loading her garbage bags back into the BMW, looking like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else. "I can't believe you're doing this to your mother," my mother said, playing what she clearly thought was her trump card. "After everything I've done for you, after I carried you for 9 months and raised you and sacrificed so much. You're right, you did all those things, and I'm grateful for them. But they don't entitle you to my house. They don't erase years of making me feel worthless. They don't mean I have to let you move in uninvited and take advantage of my success. I'm grateful for what you gave me as a child, but I don't owe you my adult life in return." "We'll sue you," my father said suddenly, turning back toward the gate with renewed purpose. "We'll contest your ownership of this property. We'll claim you defrauded us somehow, or that you're not competent to manage this kind of asset. You'll what, Dad? Hire a lawyer with what money? I know you're drowning in debt. I know the reverse mortgage on your house. I know Melissa's behind on her lease payments and Derek filed for bankruptcy last year. I know all of it, and I know you were counting on moving in here to solve all your financial problems. But that's not happening. I built this life myself. I'm not going to let you destroy it because you can't manage your own." That stunned them into silence. I'd never let on that I knew the extent of their financial troubles. I'd let them maintain their facades of success while I quietly built actual success. But clearly someone had been talking, probably Marcus, who'd stayed friends with me even after becoming Derek's friend first. "How do you—" Derek started. "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you need to leave, now. Or I call the police." They left. Finally, reluctantly, with a lot of angry door slamming and shouted comments that I couldn't quite make out through the security camera audio. My father peeled out of the driveway, leaving skid marks on the expensive pavement. Derek followed close behind. Melissa took a little longer, first taking photos of the gate and the house visible beyond it, probably planning to post them on social media with some martyred caption about being rejected by her ungrateful sibling. But eventually, they were all gone. The driveway was empty except for the lingering smell of burnt rubber from my father's dramatic exit. I sat in my office for a long time after they left, staring at the empty gate camera feed, processing what had just happened. They'd actually tried to move in, without asking, without even considering that I might say no. They'd been so confident in their entitlement to my success that they'd shown up with luggage and just expected to be accommodated. The worst part was that some small part of me wasn't even surprised. Of course they'd do this. Of course they'd try to take what I'd built without putting in any of the work. That's who they'd always been. People who measured worth by external markers of success and felt entitled to claim credit or benefit from anything good that happened to anyone connected to them. I'd spent 3 years working in the shadows, building something they couldn't see, becoming someone they didn't recognize. And now that it was visible, now that I had something tangible to show for all that work, they wanted to move in and claim it as their own. But I'd learned something important during those 3 years of silence and solitary work. That I didn't need their approval, didn't need their validation, didn't need them at all, really. I'd built this life myself, earned this house myself, created this success myself, and I'd be damned if I let them take it from me now. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The messages started within an hour of them leaving. Mom. I can't believe you did that to us. Mom. We're your family. Mom. How could you be so cruel? Derek. Congrats on being the most selfish person I've ever met. Derek. Hope that house is worth it. Melissa. We were just trying to help you not be lonely, but whatever. Melissa. Enjoy your empty mansion. Dad. Very disappointed in your behavior today. We raised you better than this. I read through them all, feeling nothing. Maybe a year ago, these messages would have hurt, would have made me question myself, wonder if I was being unreasonable, consider backing down, but I'd spent too long being hurt by them. I'd built up too much armor, and more importantly, I'd finally learned to trust my own judgment about what I deserved and what I didn't. I typed a single response to the group chat. I bought a house with money I earned through 3 years of work you all dismissed as meaningless. You showed up uninvited with luggage and expected to move in without asking. The only selfish people here are you. Lose my address. Then I muted the chat again and blocked all their numbers. For the next week, they tried various other methods of contact. Email, social media. My mother even tried to get my aunt, her sister, who I barely knew, to call me and mediate. I politely declined to engage with any of it. The house was peaceful without them. I settled into a rhythm. Work in the morning, pool in the afternoon, more work in the evening, reading or watching something on the deck at night. I hired a cleaning service to come twice a week, started furnishing the rooms slowly, buying quality pieces that would last rather than rushing to fill space. I made friends with my neighbors, a retired couple on one side, a young family on the other. They'd both heard through the neighborhood gossip network about my family showing up and being turned away. Apparently several neighbors had watched the whole thing unfold, and they both separately told me they admired me for setting boundaries. Family can be the hardest people to say no to, the retired woman, Mrs. Patterson, told me over coffee one morning, but sometimes they need to hear it most. My work continued to grow. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage client communications and scheduling. Started considering whether I wanted to build an actual company, hire other developers, scale beyond just me. The possibility was there if I wanted it. About 3 weeks after the gate incident, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was spam. But curiosity won out. "Alex, it's Marcus, Derek's friend from law school. I was with them when they showed up at your place. I was driving your dad's car. I wanted to apologize for being part of that clusterfuck. I didn't know the full story until after. Derek always made it sound like you were the family screw-up and they were trying to help you. But after everything went down and I did some digging, I realized what you've actually been doing. Building a freelance business while they mocked you. Saving and investing while they spent everything they made. Buying a house while they were all living beyond their means. That's impressive as hell. You didn't owe them anything. I'm sorry I was there as part of that entitlement brigade. If you ever want to grab coffee and talk shop, I'm thinking about leaving traditional law practice and starting my own consulting firm. Let me know. No pressure. Just wanted you to know at least one person recognized what you accomplished. Marcus. I stared at the email for a long time. It was the first genuine apology I'd gotten from anyone connected to this situation. And it was from someone who'd been there, but wasn't actually family. I wrote back, "Thanks for reaching out. Coffee sounds good. Let me know when you're free." We met at a cafe downtown the following week. Marcus was different than I remembered from the few times I'd met him at Derek's birthday parties or holiday gatherings, more relaxed, less performative. We talked about his plans for leaving big law, about my freelance business, about the challenges and rewards of building something outside traditional career paths. Your brother is spiraling, by the way, Marcus mentioned toward the end of our conversation. In case you were wondering, he's been spending like crazy trying to maintain his lifestyle, and it's catching up with him. Behind on rent, maxed out credit cards, still leasing cars he can't afford. He's actually asked me for money twice since the gate thing. Did you give it to him? Hell no, I'm not enabling that mess. He took a sip of his coffee. Your sister isn't much better, and your parents are discovering that their retirement savings aren't as robust as they thought. They were counting on being able to sell their house for a huge profit, but the market's softening and they're upside down on their mortgage. It's a whole disaster. And they thought they could just move into my house and fix all their problems. Pretty much. Which is insane, but honestly not surprising if you know them. They've always been the type to assume the world should arrange itself for their benefit. He paused. Derek did say one thing that stuck with me, though. He said, "How did Alex get successful when they're so much dumber than us?" And I remember thinking, dude, maybe that's exactly why. Maybe Alex was smart enough to not waste time and money on appearances. After Marcus left, I sat in my car for a while, processing that conversation. My family was financially struggling, had been for a while apparently, and I'd had no idea, because they'd been so busy maintaining appearances and mocking me for not keeping up that they'd never been honest about their own situations. It should have felt good, in a petty revenge sort of way. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad that they'd worked so hard to seem successful while undermining their actual security. Sad that they'd tried to solve their problems by taking from me rather than fixing their own issues. But I also felt free. I'd spent so much of my life seeking their approval, trying to prove I was as good as them, measuring myself against their definitions of success. And now I didn't have to anymore. I'd built something real while they'd built facades. And when the facades crumbled, they'd tried to steal what I'd built instead of learning the lesson. That wasn't my problem to solve. That was theirs. Chapter 6. Moving forward. 6 months after the gate incident, I hosted my first dinner party at the house. Not family. I still hadn't spoken to any of them except for one terse email exchange with my mother where she'd asked if I'd reconsider this vendetta, and I'd replied that boundaries weren't vendettas. Instead, I invited my neighbors, Marcus, a few other freelancers I'd gotten to know through online networking groups, and my assistant Sarah and her partner. 10 people total, sitting around the table I'd finally bought for the dining room, eating food I'd ordered from a local catering company because I still couldn't cook to save my life. It was the kind of evening I'd imagined when I bought the house. Good conversation, laughter, people who knew me as I actually was, rather than as the disappointment they'd decided I must be. People who asked about my work with genuine interest and celebrated my successes without immediately calculating how they could benefit. This house is incredible, Sarah's partner commented, looking around at the high ceilings and large windows. How long have you been here? Almost 7 months now? And you did this all yourself? The business, the saving, everything? Yeah. Took 3 years of very focused work and living pretty minimally, but I got there. That's amazing. Most people our age are drowning in debt or living paycheck to paycheck. The discipline that must have taken... It helped that I had good motivation, I said wryly. My family spent those 3 years telling me I'd never amount to anything. Turns out spite is a powerful productivity tool. Everyone laughed, and Marcus raised his glass. To spite-driven success. We drank, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was what I'd been working toward, though I hadn't fully realized it until now. Not just the house or the financial security, but this. The freedom to choose who I spent time with. To build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. To create a life that actually felt like mine. My business continued to grow. By the 1-year mark of owning the house, I'd hired 3 other developers to work with me on larger projects. We were still fully remote, but I'd converted the guest house into a proper office space where we could meet in person when needed. I was making more money than I knew what to do with, honestly. After years of scarcity and careful budgeting, I suddenly had surplus. I increased my investment contributions, started a scholarship fund for students from low-income backgrounds pursuing tech education, donated to causes I cared about, and I bought myself things. Nice things. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted them and I could afford them. A new car that didn't make concerning noises. Quality furniture, books, art for my walls. A sound system that made my music collection actually sound the way it was meant to. I dated, unsuccessfully at first, and then with more confidence as I learned to trust my judgment about people. Met someone who made me laugh and challenged me and didn't care that my family was a disaster. Someone who looked at my house and said, "This is nice," but was more impressed by the work I'd done to get here than the marble countertops. Life moved forward. Seasons changed. The house became home. And my family stayed blocked. I heard about them occasionally through Marcus or through my aunt, who'd apparently decided she wanted a relationship with me after years of basically ignoring my existence. Derek had filed for bankruptcy. Melissa had moved back in with my parents after her boyfriend left her. My mother had taken a reverse mortgage on their house to cover expenses. They were struggling, really struggling, and part of me felt bad about that. But the larger part remembered them standing at my gate with their luggage, demanding entry to a house they hadn't helped me earn. Remembered 3 years of mockery and dismissal. Remembered being made to feel worthless for making choices they didn't understand or value. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. They'd bet on appearances and immediate gratification. I'd bet on delayed gratification and genuine skill building. We'd both gotten exactly what we'd worked for.